Hey, and welcome to my video today. So I'm going to do a video based on how to get into UX. So I've done one recently where I've said about applying for my first role in UX, but I kind of wanted to do one that expands this a little bit more. And I'll tell you where this comes from. So I've been having Zoom calls with a few people who've asked my advice in terms of how I've gotten to UX from marketing and kind of experience in terms of how they can develop further into this field. And on reflection, it's one of those things where it takes time. Um, and you see all these videos on like YouTube and like LinkedIn where it's like, oh, I got into UX within 6 months or 3 months. And it's like with everything, if you have that set expectation that you're going to get into it by 6 months, and realistically, it takes about a year at least to get from one career to another. If you're going to UX, it's not going to be a here it goes. You might have done a boot camp, you might have done your own self-paced learning, but actually to get into it and actually do a decent job, it's going to take time. And it kind of feels like the whole message of being dampened down that you need to be rushed in this, and it just pace yourself in terms of how you get into it. So for myself, I sort of took I suppose a variety of different strategies in terms of getting into UX. So again, background, probably don't need to say too much about it, but in terms of being in the pandemic, being in marketing and realizing this isn't the career I want to go into, it kind of didn't feel, it felt like a natural step, but for me, I've always wanted to go into entrepreneurship, and UX felt like that bridge between my marketing experience and UX and product development going forward, which was fantastic. Problem is I had no, I suppose, contacts within this field. I had no prior experience to it. And it was just doing Google search. And Google search is really good to get into basics in terms of understanding what it's about, what kind of career aspects you get. But actually, the main benefit of doing it is speaking to people in this field. So the first one was Google search. The second one was reaching out towards getting a mentor, which I did through UXPA. I think I spoke to about 10 people, and then one of them, Laura, actually became my mentor because, like, I suppose with a mentor, you need to make sure you have that personal connection with somebody, and also make sure that you are going to be accountable. And it's somebody you can easily approach if something goes wrong. You can be like, oh, I can ask you advice. Can this work? And it was good to get her experience in terms of the hiring experience, contacts within the field, and just general advice, because my mentor was about 2 or 3 steps ahead of me where I am with my career now. And it's good to get her own reflection in terms of how to get into it, what kind of activities I can do to be accountable for that change. And yeah, the third thing was I did a boot camp or course on introduction to UX design, which was by UX Academy, which is brilliant to understand a bit more about getting case studies, understanding practicalities in terms of creating UX project. And yeah, building up contacts, which was great. So that's kind of the set basics. But in terms of developing it from there, I basically reached out in terms of doing a case study or doing an additional case study that I could build for my portfolio. In terms of doing it on my own, in terms of understanding, okay, I've learned all this so far, how can I develop this further so I can add to my portfolio whilst working part time? So I've got experience in terms of user research, client management and expectations, looking at wireframing, presenting ideas, which is good because I could sort of see, okay, this is how I'm going to develop further and how I can work with the client on a real life project, which is great. So that's what advice in terms of getting the experience in terms of trying to grow. I suppose on the past, it's great because you sort of see how a UX project works. Going into a company is different. So I just put a little note in terms of understanding how that sort of experience helps in terms of understanding how you can work as a UXer, but then also understanding a bit more about how that reflects on the company that you want to go into. So myself, I've had to learn about working with engineers, working as a cross-functional team, understanding how I can work with stakeholders, understanding how UX projects work in a company with, I suppose, low UX maturity. And it's hard because it's not about, it's not the straightforward, like, oh, I'm going to implement this UX process going forward. It's all about, it's a deeper understanding of that. You need to understand the product you're trying to work on. You need to understand who you're going to interview. So within the company itself, there is a lot of users, not just one key user that uses the product. And you kind of need to reflect on how the changes work on that. You also have to work with processes and also strategies that are in place within your job role. So it's integrating that. But that you can only get I suppose, working within a company itself or doing a voluntary internship. But it's just, I suppose, a keynote in terms of when you're trying to look for a job, this is what you need to go consider within the UX process. It's not straightforward. And make sure you don't dictate to anybody. And this is something that I realise I do a bit in terms of like, oh, I think this should be changed to engineers. And that's not what they want to hear. You want to be in a collaborative process in terms of going, users have said this. How do you think it's going to work going forward? And have you got any suggestions? Because majority of the time, there's a lot of people that have got more experience and they can bring that over to you in terms of what is a viable change. In terms of, I suppose, again, once you've done the bootcamp stuff, my advice would be to actually just keep learning and growing whilst applying for jobs, because I think when you're learning and growing, you sort of know what kind of area you want to go into and kind of understand a bit more about what kind of things you enjoy. And again, I have to really dig into LinkedIn for this because I think it's really bad that UX and UI seems to be clouded with this situation where people say, oh, can you mark my UX work? And it's like, well, this is great, but this is UI work. And also the fact that there is no logical reason behind it. It's a nice design, but why are you designing it? And I would like to stress that when you do UX-based projects or even like don't voluntary, so you can get experience into UX, don't emphasize on a massive change. Focus on the little change that can bring the best experience to the user. And again, this LinkedIn problem, the fact that in real life, when you do UX projects, it's the little changes that can have the biggest impact on the job role. Because if you change so much within the user interface, you're going to piss off, excuse my language, but you're going to piss off like loads of stakeholders and users in terms of the way they've used it before, but you've changed it because you think it's a nice design. Just implement small changes, whether it's a button that indicates, oh, this is where you go next, or bringing better content forward so that users can see it. You know, make sure that when you design stuff, you put the user in front and also relates back to the business needs. In terms of books I recommend for learning a bit more, there's a book that I've been reading called Continuous Discovery Habits. I try to remember what it's called now. And it's a book by Teresa Torres. This is a book that was recommended by a manager, and I really appreciate it. It's an amazing book. It helps with, I suppose, user research in terms of getting better user stories from people and understanding a bit about motivations, what the key pain points they're finding, and just creating that regular conversation with the user. Because I think there's so much within user research, the fact that it's focused more on just one step, but actually user experience is iterative. You're always redesigning no matter what. You're always looking for changes because that's what the user is. And also people's minds change as well in terms of set processes. So that's, I suppose, one book I would recommend, particularly if you want to be a user researcher side of things. I would also recommend doing, it's called the Interaction Design Foundation. I think that's what it's called, IDF. And it's got loads of amazing courses. I've learned so much in terms of these bite-sized informations, and things are starting to come into place in terms of, oh, so this is how I can bring this to my job role and how I can bring it into the product management side of things. So yeah, that would be my advice. I'd also advise to reach out as much as possible to UXers. Have a reason to reach out, not just to be like, oh, hi, I wanted to contact you and stuff, but have a reason that you want to reach out to people. So for example, myself at the moment, I'm trying to reach out to UXers who focus on metrics and understanding how I can implement that within the organisation effectively, or it might be understanding a bit more about, can you tell me more about experience into getting into UX, like sort of video. So you can do that via, again, LinkedIn, Twitter. I would even say IDF as well is a good organisation, and UXPA UK is a really good organisation to reach out to fellow UXers. So hopefully I've given you some insights into how to get into UX, or my own learnings into UX. Remember, this industry is always continually evolving and learning, so you need to make sure that you continually learn, continually I suppose, update your portfolio and LinkedIn profile to show that what you want to do with UX, and just continually just keep reaching out to people with that industry. Remember, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And I kind of wish that was less promoted, first promoted more rather than say get into UX within a certain time period. It's all about your learning and how you want to grow and develop within this field. So on that note, speak to you later. Ciao for now.